It is Rivalry Weekend. Like, if you had to embody Rivalry Weekend, I mean, it is what embodies college football in my mind. To break it all down, some Rivalry Weekend superlatives, if you will, for your Thanksgiving. The man, the myth, the legend, Andy Staples. Andy, Turkey Day, things get weird during college football season. They get the weirdest on Rivalry Weekend. Figured we kind of break down rather some of our superlatives. First things first, happy Thanksgiving. How you doing?
Doing good. Ready to eat. Ready to make a little mac and cheese, little mashed potatoes and gravy, little turkey. This is the best holiday of the year because it is all about the food.
And you get football right on top of it. So a nice little pairing there. I mean, let's start here though, Andy. Let's go with the sneakiest rivalry game of this slate. I know Mississippi State's about to play here in a few hours. What is your pick here for the sneakiest?
I would say Egg Bowl, because how many times has a game been determined by a player pretending to pee like a dog on the goalpost because he is doing it as an homage to another player from his school who pretended to pee like a dog on the goalpost?
It's just good fun. Just good, clean fun. A lot of camouflage you would expect on both sides of that when it comes to the crowd.
So
I think
a lot of
we'll
real
have
tree
a good camo showing.
A lot of real tree. We won't see many people in the stands because they will be camouflaged. Now, it is going to be – this one's a tricky one because you got Mississippi State with an interim coach with Greg Knox. Now, we saw Greg Knox with the four-wheeler in the locker room before the Southern Miss game. I talked about this on my show. So, Greg Knox trying to make a run at Ed Orgeron as greatest interim coach of all time. Because right now, if I fired my coach, I would bring in Coach O for the last 2 or 3 games of the season and just let him – have fun and do his thing because he's the greatest interim coach who ever lived. But Greg Knox, who is now 2-0 as an interim coach, is winning against Florida State as Florida's interim coach. Southern Miss is Mississippi State's interim coach. If he could pull off the Egg Bowl win, then he becomes on that same level as Coach O. Like, if you fire your coach, you just call up Greg Knox and be like, Greg, you and your four-wheeler, get it in the locker room right now.
Put him on the shoulders, carry him off, give him a king's exit. Like, no, I'm with you. That's one that's going to be, I mean, especially with Lane Kiffin being a part of that matchup too, it should have a fair amount of just weirdness to it to go along with the sneakiness. My sneakiest matchup here, Andy, how about the Governor's Cup? You got Kentucky going to Louisville. Kentucky, to me, is one of those teams that I call like cockroach teams. Like, there's some teams that are just impossible to kill. And that's Iowa, it's Iowa State, I think it's Kansas State. Like, every single year they're the same. Kentucky, with Mark Stoops running the show, is one of those teams to me. And with Louisville, with all they have to play for, and we're talking about the ACC title game, and then like you're even floating the college football playoff around with Louisville, it would be so college football for Kentucky to find a way to win that game on the road. Very, very sneaky to me. What do you think?
Kentucky has won this game 4 times in a row. It's not been particularly close of late. Now, I think Jeff Brom changes the math on this thing. But I will say this. If we look at it this way, I know Louisville theoretically has a chance to still make the college football playoff, but there would have to be a lot of chaos because Louisville has by far the worst loss of any one-loss team. They lost to Pitt, which, we know why it happened because it was right after that Notre Dame game. But when you put it up against everybody else, you're like, we can't put a team that lost to Pitt in the playoff. So if you're Louisville, if we really think about this, you get a lot more out of beating Florida State than you do out of beating Kentucky. So if you're going to concentrate your energy on one thing, it's beating Florida State next week because that wins you an ACC title. So that I would say don't be shocked if Louisville's looking ahead a little bit. And this is a team that it's not used to winning yet. They're not used to being here. So it's a little bit different situation. It's the same reason they lost to Pitt. They're not used to this. And so I think if you've been successful for a while, you know how to compartmentalize all that stuff. You're ready for this game. But in this case, I don't know how ready they're going to be. I know they would like to turn this rivalry around, but I think they'd probably rather win the ACC title if you're picking one or the other. So, this is one where I think there's definitely room for a little weirdness here. I think Louisville should win this. I think they should get on the right side of this thing. But if they lose this and still beat Florida State, they're not going to be thinking about whether they lost this or not.
Yeah, and if Jack Plummer can take care of the football, which is a little bit easier said than done for him this season, things could be headed the right direction headed into the ACC title game. Let's talk about some hatred. I know it's Thanksgiving, and it's a good feeling, a good vibes kind of holiday, but with it being rivalry weekend, hatred is just an inevitable part of this whole thing. What is the rivalry that you're watching this weekend, Andy, that has maybe the most hatred?
Well, the Egg Bowl and the Territorial Cup, Arizona State, tend to be the sneaky, nastiest rivalries where they just hate each other. But I don't think there's any question what it is this year. It's Michigan-Ohio State. And I realize we'll probably use this for several different answers. But what has gone on between those two schools, the accusations being lobbed, because remember, the Michigan people are convinced that Ohio State turned them in, that Ohio State funded some sort of like surreptitious op to find all this stuff. So they are convinced of all this stuff, both sides. Ohio State is convinced that every single rumor about Michigan is true. And they are just going to be at each other's throats. Their fans will be at each other's throats, and the teams will be at each other's throats. And then you add the stakes of the game. But this is especially nasty this year.
Yeah, Andy. And I mean, to mention what Ryan Day said when fake Lou Holtz was talking about him.
Correct.
Now you got a real head coach last year saying that he was born on third base when he thinks he hit a triple. And like, I promise you, everybody in Columbus remembers that. And that's why we're 100% in lockstep here. Like, all of the off-the-field factors baked into what was already arguably the most intense rivalry in college football just make this thing, 10x more interesting. I'm going to go ahead and throw one more in here because I figured you and I would probably agree on this because this feels like the clear runaway most hatred. Kind of sneakier on the hatred side of things, but I grew up around Georgia Tech. And like year round, it's probably not competitive right now, obviously, but like the clean old fashioned hate, which is the name of that game, Georgia Tech would love nothing more than to somehow, some way, New Mexico State this whole thing and shock Georgia on Thanksgiving. So there's a lot of hate baked into that one.
It tells you how far apart those programs are that you just said Georgia Tech would have to New Mexico State this thing.
Yep.
Like they are so far apart. But yes, it would be the biggest upset of the season if it happened. And I think Brent Key's done a really good job in year one. Haynes King has been very good for Georgia Tech, but I think Georgia's going to roll in that one. The one I think there'll be some hatred and some nastiness potentially is Oregon State.
Yep.
I think that's going to continue. I think they're going to figure out a way to keep playing that thing. But there is now even more vitriol because of what happened in the offseason with realignment. Plus, you have the stakes of this game. Plus, you have how Oregon State won it last year, just running the ball down Oregon's throat. Like, there will be teams trying to make a point.
Yeah, without question. And not just with Oregon leaving for the Big Ten, with Oregon State kind of being one of the two odd men out of this whole thing. I mean, I'm sure they would love, like you said, the stakes of it. The spoiler spot for Oregon State would just be like, be so sweet if they could find a way to get it done for the good folks in Corvallis. How about this one? Potential to get the weirdest when it comes to this rivalry slate. We know things get weird every single rivalry weekend. What's one that you're watching with the weird factor here?
So Friday night, Oregon State definitely could get weird because I think people forget that Oregon has to win this one. Like if Oregon loses to Oregon State and Arizona beats Arizona State, which is pretty likely according to Vegas, then Arizona would go to the Pac-12 title game. So this is one that there's more to it than I think what everybody believes. And again, you go back to the way that game ended last year with Oregon State just running all over Oregon. Now, I think Oregon rebuilt their defense to make sure that isn't going to happen this time. But I also think Oregon State probably looks at how the Washington game ended, where for whatever reason, I don't know why Oregon State tried to be Washington on that last drive. They didn't need to be. They had 5 minutes and needed to get a field goal. Like, run your offense. You were running all over them. Why are you all of a sudden thinking that DJ Uiagalelei is Michael Penix Jr.? Like, so given an entire game to maybe correct that mistake, I think they try to do that to Oregon. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it this year because Oregon's defense is so much better than it was last year. But that's one where if they can get rolling, then that could be a very competitive game. I was very surprised when that spread came out. It was 13.5. It felt really big because I think Oregon State's better than that.
Yeah, 2 scores. I think, like you said, 13.5, 2 scores for how closely Oregon State played Washington the week before, too, feels a little bit weird. Talking about weird spreads, Nebraska, Iowa, the Heroes game. Yes. Nebraska opened as an underdog, and now they're favored by 2 points. And I mean, to be talking about spreads is perfect for Thanksgiving because we got a lot of people, I'm sure, that watched this show that fed their families this whole season based on Iowa unders. And so with just the way
you saw the total, right?
It's perfect. It's so perfect.
27 and a half.
Unreal.
It's incredible.
Unbelievable in every sense. And Matt Rule and company trying to make a bowl game. They're at home. Like just everything that goes into this game, from the line itself to the under to the punch to the field position to the flux that Iowa has been in as an offensive staff, and they're still going to the Big Ten title game. Like this to me screams weird. Andy, what do you think?
Well, and how about Chubba Purdy emerging as Nebraska's quarterback? Does he give them a more dynamic look than Jeff Sims or Heinrich Haarberg did? It's hard to say, but it does feel like they feel pretty confident with him. No Cooper DeJean for Iowa. Now, they didn't have him against Illinois either, but does that make it tougher for their defense? And remember, this game was weird last year. Iowa, which had a chance to clinch the Big Ten West last year, went and spit the bit against Nebraska and an interim coach. So I wouldn't be shocked if this is weird to get like this. If it goes over, I mean, you just need a 15-13 game to go over. Like the game Iowa played last week would send it over. But Nebraska winning this game because they need it for bowl eligibility and Iowa doesn't need it for anything wouldn't shock me one bit.
That's why we love the games. Last one for you here, Andy. Talking about the most impactful rivalry of the weekend. You mentioned Nebraska-Iowa, obviously a pretty big impact there for Nebraska. Is there one that you're watching here specifically outside of the game itself with Ohio State-Michigan? That's obviously the most impactful. Outside of that, though, what's the most impactful rivalry you're looking at?
Well, you got the Iron Bowl still. We have not mentioned the Iron Bowl yet. And I realize Auburn just lost to New Mexico State, but I think back to 2 years ago. 2 years ago, Alabama goes into the Iron Bowl. That's that first Brian Harsin Auburn team. They took them to 4 overtimes. The same Alabama team that the next week beat the snot out of eventual national champion Georgia in the SEC championship game. Weird things happen in that game. Weird things happen at Jordan-Hare in that game. So as strange as last week was, where New Mexico State put the hammer down on Auburn, I wouldn't be shocked if Auburn keeps this close at least for a little while.
Can you imagine if we get Alabama rolling into Atlanta with 2 losses and they're playing Georgia? It would be. I mean, it would be just. I don't know what the word would be for it, but it would be ridiculous in every sense. And like you said, Brian Harsin played Bryce Young extremely close, and those two obviously have very different legacies going forward. That was one I almost put down as a weird one.
4.
It's a lot of overtimes. I mean, the kids are in bed at that point. You got 4 overtimes. How about Florida State, Florida? Little Sunshine Showdown. Obviously, for Florida State, if you drop that game, you're not out of the playoff race. That'd be a pretty ugly mark on the resume, you would have to believe, losing to Florida, who's trying to make a bowl game right now. But for Florida, if they beat Florida State, who's been the big dog in the state, I mean, over the last year and a half or so, I'm thinking like Billy Napier approval rating. I'm thinking packaging that up and taking it on the recruiting trail where they've already been pretty solid. Like, I think this could kind of be the moment for Billy Napier with 2 backup quarterbacks where things could get very, very interesting, and obviously has a high impact for Florida State, but for Florida even more so on the recruiting trail.
He needs it bad. Billy Napier needs this kind of W bad. The fallout from the Missouri game actually surprised me a little bit. I thought people would be madder after the LSU game. It felt like they were more resigned to what happened in the LSU game. The Missouri game pissed everybody off even more, which I actually thought Florida put up a nice fight against Missouri. I didn't expect them to win the game, but then when you give up 4th and 17 with the game on the line, that's pretty unforgivable. So I think Billy Napier needs this win bad. I think he's going to have to revamp his staff in the offseason no matter what happens in this game, but a win would help a lot. Meanwhile, Mike Norvell, take away the immediate stuff. You want to stay undefeated. You want to compete for the college football playoff. They want to step on Florida and Miami's throats in recruiting. This is their chance to do that. Win this game. One game doesn't decide a recruiting class, doesn't usually make a recruit's decision for him. But the more of these you can stack, the better off you are in terms of getting the high school guys in the most talented state in America. So that one's big for them, but obviously the obvious part. Now, you go to the college football playoff piece of it. I don't know exactly how it's going to all shake out. I think a 13-0 Florida State will get in. I don't see a scenario where they get left out. The only way is if they really struggled against Florida and Louisville and still won. But this gives Tate Rodemaker a chance to have 2 games where the committee can watch him play and say, okay, we think they are still as good as they were with Jordan Travis, or they're not as good as they were with Jordan Travis, or, and I don't think this will happen, but who knows, better than they were with Jordan Travis. Like, he has those 2 games to let them see that. And it's very similar to what Cardale Jones had with the Big Ten championship game in 2014. Now, he only got the 1 game because JT Barrett got hurt in the Michigan game. Tate Rodemaker has 2 games to do this. This will be the first time we've ever seen Tate Rodemaker coming off a week of practice with the ones. The only other time we've seen him play when it really mattered was last week against North Alabama and last year when he had to go in for Travis against Louisville and did lead them to a win. So I don't know what to expect from him. And I will say, when you get to play Florida's defense and you have those receivers, you got a chance to break yourself in pretty well.
Yeah, a chance to run the football, it feels like, for Florida State. Like being able to take the pressure off your young quarterback, let him turn around and hand the ball off, get some play action. Yeah, I think it sets up nicely for Rodemaker, but obviously we'll have a massive impact for both sides. Andy, I appreciate you making time, man. What do we got for Thanksgiving? We got any dishes that we're particularly excited about? You mentioned mac and cheese. Like we have a go-to here?
So I make the mac and cheese. I have not been able to take over the full hosting from my mother-in-law. I don't think that's going to happen. She's a great hostess, so I have no right to claim that. But I always make the mac and cheese. We bring a secondary turkey or the ham. The mac and cheese is a recipe I stole from a restaurant in Michigan called Clarkston Union. So Clarkston is extreme northern Detroit suburbs above Pontiac, where the Lions used to play. And they have Clarkston Union, and their sister restaurant is Union Woodshop, which is a barbecue place. They make the best mac and cheese on earth. And some intrepid person copied that recipe and put it on the internet. I've been making it for years, and it every time is a massive hit. So you can find that recipe on the internet. It takes a little practice, but once you get it down, it's just getting devoured every time.
Yeah, we're gonna have to connect off the air about that one. I have to get that recipe so I can bring my egg into these cooking competitions during Thanksgiving. Andy, appreciate you so much. Happy Thanksgiving and enjoy Rivalry Weekend. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.